I'm Ethan Walker, a 36-year-old architect who once believed I had built the strongest foundation not only for skyscrapers but for my marriage too. My wife, Emily, had always been my anchor, a vivacious, whip-smart marketing manager who could light up any room she walked into. For 11 years, she was my partner in everything. My late-night confidant, my co-dreamer, the love of my life, or so I thought. Looking back now, I suppose the cracks began to show months ago, small fissures in the bedrock of our relationship that I'd been too distracted, or perhaps too naive to notice. I chalked up her growing absences to her demanding new project at work. Emily had landed a coveted role on a high-profile campaign at her firm, partnering with a man whose name had only briefly crossed our dinner table, Ryan Carter. Ryan was younger, single, and from what I'd heard, bursting with charisma. "He's a genius," Emily had gushed once, her green eyes sparkling. A little cocky, but in a harmless way. She'd laughed as if to dismiss it, but something in her tone, a glimmer of admiration, lodged itself uncomfortably in my chest. Still, I told myself not to read into it. Emily was just doing what she always did, striving to be the best. But her long hours stretched into overnight trips she hadn't mentioned until the night before. Text messages I sent during her late meetings would go unanswered. Her phone, once a constant companion, now seemed curiously absent, always on silent, always face down. I convinced myself these were the hallmarks of a career woman juggling too much at once. That was until I found the shirt. It was late one Wednesday evening when I came home from work to find Emily already asleep, or pretending to be, in our bed. She hadn't even waited up for me, something she'd never done before. As I changed out of my work clothes, I noticed a button-up shirt draped across the back of a chair in the corner of the room. It wasn't mine. It was navy, too slim-fitting, with the faintest whiff of expensive cologne. "Whose shirt is this?" I asked aloud, more curious than accusatory. My voice cut through the stillness like a blade. Emily stirred and sat up groggily, her auburn hair tumbling in waves over her shoulders. "Oh, that's Ryan's," she said after a beat, her words casual but her expression too carefully composed. "He left it in my car after we spilled coffee on it during a client meeting. I meant to drop it off, but I forgot." Her explanation felt plausible, reasonable even, but there was something off in the way she said it. Her voice lacked the sharp edge of annoyance she usually had when I asked unnecessary questions, replaced instead by a measured calm that unsettled me. I didn't press her further. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what might spill out if I did. Instead, I folded the shirt, placed it in a bag, and left it by the door for her to return. But that night I couldn't sleep. My mind churned over possibilities I wasn't ready to confront. Was it just a shirt? Or was it the first clue in a story I wasn't supposed to find? The morning after the shirt incident, Emily was back to her usual routine, cheerful and composed as she sipped her coffee at the kitchen island. She hummed softly, a habit she had when she was in a good mood, but the sound grated against my nerves. Her breezy demeanor felt out of sync with the growing knot in my stomach. I had questions, but I wasn't ready to ask them outright. Not yet. So I watched her from across the room, hoping her face or tone might betray something, anything. She was calm, unbothered, like someone who didn't have a single secret weighing on her soul. "What's on your mind, Ethan?" she asked suddenly, catching me off guard. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion. "Just thinking about work?" I lied, forcing a casual shrug. "Big deadlines coming up." "Same here," she replied, sliding her coffee mug into the sink. "Ryan and I have that presentation today for the Lexington account. Wish me luck." There it was again, his name dropped casually into conversation. It wasn't unusual, given how much time they worked together, but now every mention of him felt like a pebble in my shoe, something I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. I muttered a quick "good luck" and let the topic drop. That day, I found myself distracted at work, unable to focus on the blueprints sprawled across my desk. My thoughts kept circling back to Emily and Ryan. How often did they stay late together? How many of those overnight trips were really necessary? And why hadn't I questioned any of this before? By the time I got home, the tension had built into something almost palpable. Emily wasn't back yet. Another late meeting? She'd texted. And I found myself alone in the quiet of our house. It didn't feel like home tonight. It felt like a stage where everything was too neat, too perfectly arranged to be real. I wandered aimlessly until I ended up in the living room. Emily's work bag was slouched against the couch, its zipper slightly open. I hesitated, torn between the need for answers and the shame of invading her privacy. But then I thought about the shirt, the long hours, the unreturned texts, and before I could talk myself out of it, I reached down and pulled her bag open. First, it was mundane. Pens, a notepad, her work laptop. But then I spotted something that stopped me cold. 2 hotel keycards tucked neatly into the side pocket. They weren't from her recent overnight trips, at least not any that I knew about. One was from a boutique hotel downtown, the kind that catered to couples looking for a romantic escape. The other was from a mid-range chain just outside the city. My chest tightened as I stared at them, trying to rationalize their presence. Maybe they were from work, I thought. Meetings or client stays, there had to be a reason. But deep down, the sinking weight in my gut told me otherwise. When Emily finally came home later that night, I watched her closely. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly tousled, and her perfume lingered stronger than usual. "Long day?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Exhausting," she replied with a sigh, slipping off her heels. The presentation ran late, and then Ryan and I grabbed a quick bite to go over strategy for next week. Her words felt rehearsed, practiced, too smooth to be improvised. I nodded slowly, biting back the question that was burning at the tip of my tongue. Was she lying? Or was I imagining things, letting my doubts poison what was still a perfectly normal marriage? I didn't know anymore, but the keycards sat like lead weights in my pocket, whispering that the truth might not be far away. The keycards haunted me for days. I wanted to confront Emily, to demand an explanation, but fear held me back. Fear of what I might hear. Fear of the answers I wasn't ready to face. Instead, I buried myself in work, trying to find solace in the clean, predictable lines of my architectural designs. But even there, my thoughts drifted. That Friday, Emily announced she'd be working late again. "Ryan and I are presenting final campaign ideas to the Lexington team tomorrow," she said over breakfast, barely looking up from her phone. "We'll probably be at the office past 9. I nodded but didn't respond. Something about her tone felt too casual, too detached, and it gnawed at me. As the day wore on, my unease deepened. By the time I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening tonight. Something she wasn't telling me. Against my better judgment, or maybe because I knew deep down that judgment didn't matter anymore, I decided to act. I opened the tracking app I'd installed on Emily's phone weeks ago. It was a line I never thought I'd cross, but desperate times blur the boundaries between right and wrong. The app showed her location in real time. A blinking blue that wasn't anywhere near her office. Instead, it hovered at a restaurant downtown. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It was one of those chic, upscale spots with dim lighting and intimate corners. A place you'd take someone you wanted to impress, or someone you wanted to keep hidden. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my keys and heading out the door. My mind raced as I drove, a storm of anger, dread, and that small, fragile hope that maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was meeting a client. Maybe this was all a mistake. When I arrived, I parked across the street and scanned the restaurant's windows. The tables inside were illuminated just enough for me to see shadows moving, silhouettes laughing and leaning in close. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting at a small table near the back, her face glowing in the soft light. She wasn't alone. Ryan sat across from her, leaning forward, his posture relaxed and intimate. They were laughing, sharing some private joke, and the sight of it twisted something deep inside me. I stayed frozen in my car for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My chest burned with a mix of fury and despair. This wasn't a business meeting. This wasn't work. This was personal. I thought about storming in, causing a scene, demanding answers right then and there. But the calmer, colder part of me stopped myself. A confrontation wouldn't give me what I needed, not yet. What I needed was proof, irrefutable evidence that would erase any shadow of a doubt. I stayed parked, watching them through the window like some character in a bad noir film. They stayed there for over an hour, laughing, sipping wine, their body language so easy, so comfortable it made my skin crawl. When they finally left, they walked side by side down the street. I followed at a distance, my headlights off, until they stopped outside a boutique hotel, the same one from the keycard I'd found. My stomach churned as Ryan opened the door and gestured for Emily to enter first. She hesitated, glancing around, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might turn back. But then she smiled, softly, almost shyly, and walked inside. I sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. There it was, the proof I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Emily had just walked into a hotel with another man, and I was left outside, alone, staring at the empty street. The part of me that still loved her wanted to drive home, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But the part of me that knew this betrayal would break me couldn't let it go. I started the car and pulled away, my mind already racing with what I would do next. The drive home was a blur, a fog of headlights and neon signs I barely registered. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap in half. My mind replayed the moment Emily walked into that hotel with Ryan over and over, like a haunting reel of film I couldn't turn off. When I finally stepped through the front door of our house, it felt different, smaller, emptier, like the walls were closing in on me. This was the home we'd built together, where we'd shared late-night laughs and lazy Sunday mornings. But now it felt like a lie, a facade hiding the wreckage of what we'd become. I collapsed onto the couch, my body too heavy to carry upstairs. My phone sat on the coffee table, taunting me. Part of me wanted to call Emily right then, to demand answers, to scream at her until the ache in my chest subsided. But another part of me, an angrier, colder part, knew that wouldn't be enough. Words wouldn't fix this. Words wouldn't erase the image of her with Ryan. Instead, I opened the tracking app again. The blue dot was still there, unmoving, at the boutique hotel downtown. I stared at it, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. She hadn't even bothered to make an excuse or lie about where she was. She thought I was too blind, too trusting, to notice. A wave of rage surged through me, hot and blinding, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. I needed more than anger. I needed a plan. I grabbed my laptop and began searching. Private investigators, legal advice, anything that could help me make sense of this mess. Within minutes, I had a number for a local investigator. Mark Hensley, a former cop turned PI with a reputation for discretion. His website boasted glowing reviews from people in situations far too similar to mine. I hesitated for only a moment before dialing the number. Mark Hensley Investigations. A deep, calm voice answered. Hi. This is Ethan Walker, I said, my voice unsteady. I need help with a personal matter. My wife, I think she's cheating on me. There was a pause, just long enough for me to feel the full weight of what I just said aloud. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Walker, Mark replied, his tone professional but not unkind. Why don't you tell me a little more about the situation? I laid it all out for him. The late nights, the excuses, the shirt, the keycards, and finally, what I'd witnessed tonight. He listened without interrupting, letting me spill everything until I was out of breath. It sounds like you already have a lot of suspicions and some circumstantial evidence, he said when I finished. But if you want concrete proof, something you can confront her with or even use in a divorce, you'll need more. I can help with that. What do you need from me? I asked, my voice hoarse. For starters, I'll need her schedule. Any patterns you've noticed, places she frequents. If you have any photos or documents that might be relevant, bring those too. We'll start there and see what we find. We arranged to meet the next day at his office. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the empty spot on the couch where Emily usually sat. The weight of everything hit me all at once. Grief, anger, and a crushing sense of failure. I'd promised to protect her, to be her partner in everything. How had we ended up here? When the clock struck midnight, I checked the tracking app one last time. The blue dot was gone. Emily was on her way home. I climbed into bed, feigning sleep when I heard the front door open. Her footsteps were light but deliberate as she crept upstairs, slipping into the bathroom to shower before finally sliding into bed beside me. The scent of her perfume lingered, mingling with something else, something faint but unmistakable. I kept my breathing steady, my body still, even as my heart raced. I wanted to turn to her, to ask her where she'd been, to force her to tell me the truth. But instead, I lay there in the dark, silent and seething, letting her false sense of security settle over us like a blanket. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I'll start unraveling the truth. The next morning, Emily was already up by the time I came downstairs. She stood by the counter, dressed impeccably as usual, her long hair swept into a neat bun. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her, and she was scrolling through her phone with the faintest smile curling her lips. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Morning," I muttered, my voice flat. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though I could barely stomach the thought of food or drink. The air between us felt different, heavier, like we were both dancing around a truth neither of us wanted to admit. "I'm heading out early today," she added, grabbing her keys. "Ryan wants to finalize some things before the presentation." The mention of his name again sent a hot flash of irritation through me. I forced myself to nod, though my grip on the coffee mug tightened. "Sure. Don't overwork yourself." She glanced at me then, her green eyes narrowing slightly as if she were trying to read my thoughts. "You okay? You seem off." "I'm fine," I lied, offering a weak smile. "Just tired. Long week." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say more, but then she seemed to think better of it. "Well, get some rest this weekend," she said, planting a quick, almost obligatory kiss on my cheek before heading for the door. The moment I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I grabbed my laptop and gathered everything I'd collected so far. The tracking app logs, the keycards, even the photo of the shirt I'd taken after she brushed off my question. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By mid-morning, I was sitting in Mark Hensley's office, a small but tidy space tucked into a nondescript building downtown. Mark was a burly man in his early 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His desk was cluttered with files and photographs, and the smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. "You've been busy," he said after I laid everything out on his desk. He flipped through the tracking logs and notes, nodding occasionally. "I'm not proud of it," I admitted, my voice tight, "but I need to know." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "You're not the first guy to walk in here with a story like this," he said, "and you won't be the last. The important thing is you're here now, so let's figure this out." He laid out the plan in precise, clinical terms. He would follow Emily, track her movements, and document everything. Photos, videos, whatever it took to confirm or disprove my suspicions. He assured me he'd be discreet, that she'd never know she was being watched. As he spoke, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I wanted answers, yes, but I also knew that once the truth was out, there'd be no going back. Still, I nodded along, agreeing to everything. It was too late to turn back now. Before I left, Mark handed me a burner phone. "If you need to contact me, use this. Don't call from your regular phone. If she's hiding something, you don't want to tip her off." The weight of the phone in my hand felt heavier than it should have, like I was holding a ticking bomb. "Got it," I said, slipping it into my pocket. When I got home, the house felt eerily quiet. Emily's absence seemed to echo through the empty rooms, amplifying the nagging feeling of betrayal that had taken root in my chest. I busied myself with small tasks, laundry, dishes, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But as the day wore on, my resolve began to crack. I opened the tracking app again, watching as Emily's blue dot moved across the map. She wasn't at the office. She was at a park near the city, the kind of place you'd go for a private conversation or a rendezvous. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Was Mark already on her trail? Was he seeing what I couldn't? I resisted the urge to call him to demand an update. Instead, I paced the living room, waiting for the blue to move again. Hours later, Emily finally came home, her face flushed and her smile a little too bright. "Hey," she called, dropping her bag on the couch. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a casual tone. "How was work?" "Busy," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But we got a lot done. Ryan says we're in a great place for Monday's presentation." Her mention of Ryan no longer sparked anger. It ignited something colder, something calculating. I nodded, hiding the storm that was building beneath the surface. Because now I wasn't just waiting for her to slip. I was prepared to catch her when she did. Sunday morning arrived with a strange calm, the kind that lingers before a storm. Emily was up early again, dressed in her typical weekend yoga attire, and heading out the door before I'd even finished my coffee. "Class at 9, then brunch with Lisa," she said as she slipped on her shoes. "Don't wait up." I nodded, but I didn't need to. Mark had already texted me late Saturday night, letting me know he'd have someone tailing her today. I stared at my coffee, its dark surface trembling faintly as if it, too, knew what was coming. By noon, the burner phone buzzed on the counter. I grabbed it, my hand trembling slightly. Mark's deep voice greeted me on the other end. "You were right to call me," he began. "I'm going to send you something. It's better if you see it yourself." "What do you mean?" I demanded, but he had already hung up. A minute later, a message came through with several attachments. I hesitated for a moment, my breath shallow, before opening the first image. There she was, Emily. She wasn't at a yoga class or brunch with Lisa. She was standing outside a cafe, laughing as she reached across a table to brush Ryan's arm. They were seated close, too close, and her expression was one I hadn't seen in months. She looked radiant, alive in a way that cut through me like glass. I clicked to the next photo, then the next, each one worse than the last. In one, they were walking side by side, their hands almost brushing. In another, Ryan held the cafe door open for her, his gaze lingering far too long. But the final photo was the one that broke me. The two of them stepping into his car, Emily's hand on his shoulder as she climbed in. I dropped the phone onto the counter and gripped the edge to steady myself. My mind reeled, alternating between rage and devastation. The pictures told me what I already knew but hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't just drifting away. She was already gone. Mark called again that evening, his voice calm but firm. "I need to know how you want to proceed," he said. "Do you want me to keep following her? Or do you have enough?" I stared out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My marriage, my life, everything I'd built with Emily, felt as though it was disappearing with the light. "Keep following her," I said finally. "I need more. I need the truth. All of it." Mark agreed, and we hung up, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. Emily came home later that night, smiling and chatting about her day as if nothing had happened. I nodded along, my responses automatic. Every word she spoke felt like a dagger, twisting deeper into the wound. When she kissed me goodnight, I couldn't bring myself to kiss her back. The next day, Mark called with an update. "She's consistent," he said. "Work, gym, occasional errands. But there's a pattern. She's meeting him every other day. Sometimes it's just coffee. Other times it's more. More." My throat tightened, though I already knew the answer. "They've been to that hotel again," he said, his tone heavy. "Same room. Same routine." I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea washing over me. "Do you have proof?" "Pictures, timestamps, video, everything you need," Mark said. "It's airtight." I thanked him, though my voice barely worked, and hung up. My world felt like it was crumbling beneath me. But somewhere in the wreckage, a spark of resolve began to grow. Emily had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. By Tuesday evening, I felt like I was living in two parallel worlds. One where Emily and I still played the part of a normal married couple. Dinners shared in silence, half-hearted conversations about mundane things. And another where I was piecing together the shattered fragments of trust, fueled by Mark's relentless updates. Emily was home early that night, an unusual shift from her usual working late excuses. She seemed lighter, almost carefree, as she cooked pasta in the kitchen. "Big presentation tomorrow," she said, stirring the sauce. "I think we nailed it. Ryan was amazing today. You should have seen how he handled the clients." Her voice carried that same glimmer of admiration as before, but now it sounded more like a confession than a casual comment. My stomach turned as I forced a neutral response. "That's great." She smiled at me, as though nothing was wrong, as though the weight of her betrayal wasn't hanging in the air between us. It was maddening. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could look me in the eye and pretend, but I held back, knowing it wasn't time yet. That night, I went into the guest bathroom and opened the burner phone. Mark had sent me a new email, a video file. I hesitated, bracing myself before hitting play. The shaky footage was taken from a distance, likely through the window of the boutique hotel. Even with the grainy resolution, there was no mistaking them. Emily and Ryan were standing near the bed. She laughed as he leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then they kissed, slowly at first, before it deepened into something far more intimate. I shut the phone off, my hand trembling. The confirmation hit me like a fist to the gut, even though I'd already known. Seeing it, watching her give herself to someone else was a different kind of pain, one I wasn't sure I could survive. Wednesday morning, Emily left early, humming as she packed her laptop and bag. She kissed me on the cheek and wished me a good day. "Dinner's on me tonight," she said brightly, as though her betrayal wasn't already choking the air between us. I nodded but didn't answer, watching her leave with a calmness that surprised even me. The storm inside me was quiet now, cold and controlled. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon I met Mark one final time. He handed me a thick folder filled with photos, timestamps, and detailed logs of Emily's movements. It was irrefutable evidence, proof that would hold up in any courtroom. "This is everything," Mark said, his voice measured. "It's up to you what you do with it." I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening with every image. "Thank you," I said, my voice hollow. "You've been more help than I deserved." Mark gave me a small nod, his expression one of quiet understanding. "Good luck, Ethan." That evening, I sat at the dining table, waiting for Emily to come home. The folder lay in front of me, a damning testament to everything she tried to hide. My heart pounded as I rehearsed what I would say, but no amount of preparation could ease the crushing weight in my chest. When Emily walked through the door, she was glowing, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. She set her bag down and smiled at me.
"Hey, I'm starving."
"Ready to eat." I stood slowly, holding the folder in my hands. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" I dropped the folder onto the table, letting it land with a heavy thud. Her gaze flicked to it, then back to me. "What's this?" "Open it," I said, my voice cold. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the folder. When she flipped it open, her face went pale. The blood drained from her cheeks as she stared at the photos, her lips parting in shock. "Ethan, she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me, her voice shaking. "I can explain." "No, you can't," I said, my voice rising. "Because there is no explanation that makes this okay. You lied to me, you cheated on me, and you did it over and over again." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. I was too far gone for that. "Ethan, I never meant to hurt you." "Stop," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I gave you everything, Emily, everything, and this is how you repay me." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but her tears didn't move me. They only fueled the fire burning in my chest. "You made your choice," I said coldly, "and now I'm making mine." Emily sat frozen at the table, the folder of evidence still splayed open in front of her. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edges of the chair, her tear-streaked face tilted toward the floor. Ethan, she tried again, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. I don't want excuses, I interrupted, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. And I don't want apologies. You didn't accidentally fall into his arms. You didn't trip and land in a hotel bed. You made choices repeatedly, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I felt nothing. The Emily I had loved, the woman I had spent 11 years building a life with, was a stranger to me now. The weight of her betrayal had stripped away any trace of the person I thought I knew. How long? I asked, the question tearing through the silence like a gunshot. What? She whispered, lifting her red-rimmed eyes to meet mine. How long? The words came out sharp and deliberate, each one laced with venom. How long have you been seeing him? Her gaze dropped again, and for a moment I thought she might not answer. But then she spoke, her voice barely audible. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of stolen moments, of laughing at me behind my back while she carried on with Ryan. My fists clenched at my sides, the surge of fury threatening to overwhelm me. And you were just going to keep doing it? Weren't you? I said bitterly. You had no intention of stopping, no intention of telling me the truth. I didn't know how, she admitted, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. It was a mistake, Ethan. It was never supposed to happen. I felt lost, and Ryan was there. And, don't you dare blame this on being lost, I snapped, cutting her off. You had me. You had this home, this life we built together. But that wasn't enough for you, was it? She flinched at the anger in my voice, her tears falling faster now. I still love you, Ethan, she choked out. I never stopped loving you. I laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed in the room. You have a funny way of showing it. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. I could see the realization dawning in her eyes, that there was no coming back from this, no way to repair the damage she had done. What now? She asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. I'm filing for divorce. Her face crumpled, the full weight of my words crashing down on her. No, please, she begged, reaching for me. Ethan, don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Stop, I said, stepping back before her hand could reach mine. It's too late, Emily. You broke us. And I can't. I won't live like this. Her sobs grew louder, but I forced myself to remain firm. This wasn't about her feelings anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my sanity, my life. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I left her at the table, retreating to the guest room with nothing but my phone and the clothes on my back. I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed. Not now, not ever again. In the morning, I woke to the sound of Emily moving around the house. She must have stayed up all night. Her eyes were swollen, and her movements were sluggish as she packed a small suitcase. I'll go to my sister's for a few days, she said quietly, her voice raw. To give you space. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Watching her walk out the door should have brought some relief, but all I felt was emptiness. By the afternoon, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. The folder of evidence sat between us on the desk as I recounted everything. Emily's lies, the photos, the video. It's an open and shut case. Jacob, my attorney, said confidently. You'll have no trouble proving adultery in court. But I have to ask, are you prepared for this? Divorce can be messy. I met his gaze, my jaw set. I'm ready, I said, and for the first time in days I meant it. The house felt cavernous and lifeless without Emily. Her absence should have brought some semblance of peace, but instead, it was like sitting in the ruins of a once beautiful cathedral, staring up at the broken beams and shattered glass. Each echo of my footsteps through the halls reminded me of what was gone, and how much of it had been a lie. For the first time in our marriage, I was utterly alone. No texts asking what I wanted for dinner. No faint humming from the kitchen while she cooked. No warmth in the bed beside me. And yet I didn't miss her. Not really. What I missed was the life I thought we had. The life she'd obliterated the moment she decided Ryan was worth more than her vows. The next day, I threw myself into work, drafting blueprints, reviewing bids, and replying to endless emails provided a welcome distraction. But it couldn't keep the intrusive thoughts at bay for long. Emily's words haunted me. It was a mistake. I still love you. We can fix this. Each one felt like a thorn, digging deeper every time I replayed them. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to do something, anything, to keep my mind from spiraling. I pulled out my phone and texted Mark. Me. Can you confirm Emily hasn't reached out to Ryan since she left? Mark. Affirmative. She's been staying at her sister's. No signs of contact with him. A small, bitter part of me felt relieved. At least she wasn't running back to him. Not yet. But the larger part of me knew it didn't matter. The damage was already done. That evening, I sat at the dining table with a glass of whiskey, staring at the untouched dinner I'd made. My phone buzzed, and I saw Emily's name flash on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity, or maybe morbid self-destruction, got the better of me. Hello. My voice was cold, distant. Ethan, she said softly, her tone hesitant. I just wanted to check in. To see how you're doing. I almost laughed. How I'm doing. Was she serious? I'm fine, I said, my words clipped. What do you want, Emily? There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear her struggling to find the right words. I know I hurt you, she said finally, her voice trembling, and I know I can't take it back. But I want to. I need to try to make this right. I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. There's no making this right, I said flatly. You made your choice, Emily. You chose him. I didn't choose him over you, she protested. I was confused, lost. Stop, I snapped, cutting her off. Stop making excuses. You weren't confused when you booked hotel rooms. You weren't lost when you kissed him. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her sobs began on the other end of the line, soft and pitiful. But I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt hollow, like I was talking to a ghost of the woman I used to love. I'm filing the papers, I said, my tone ice cold. You'll get them soon. Ethan, please don't do this, she begged. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Goodbye, Emily, I said, hanging up before she could say more. That night, I finally let the emotions I'd been holding back consume me. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal. They all came crashing down in a wave so powerful it left me gasping for air. I smashed a glass against the kitchen wall, watching as the shards scattered across the floor like the remnants of my marriage. I sank to the floor, my head in my hands, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not just for what I'd lost, but for the man I used to be, the man who believed in forever, in loyalty, in love. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's betrayal had taken enough from me. It wasn't going to take my future, too. I emailed Jacob, confirming my intent to file the divorce papers that day. His response was swift and professional, assuring me that everything was in place. By the end of the week, Emily would have the documents in her hands, and the process of untangling our lives would officially begin. It wasn't closure, far from it. But it was a step forward, a step away from the wreckage of what we'd been. By Friday morning, the divorce papers were ready. Jacob emailed me the final draft to review, his message curt and to the point. There were no surprises. Everything was as we discussed. Adultery cited as grounds, equitable division of assets, no alimony. Clean, decisive, and final. I printed the documents at the office, feeling the weight of every sheet of paper as I stacked them into a folder. This wasn't just paperwork. It was the formal end of a chapter, the last nail in the coffin of a life I thought was unshakable. That evening, Emily's sister's house was my destination. I sat in my car for several minutes after parking in the driveway, staring at the folder on the passenger seat. A small voice in my head whispered doubt, asking if this was really the only way. Could we salvage anything? Was I walking away too soon? But then I thought about the photographs, the hotel rooms, the months of lies. My resolve hardened. This wasn't on me. It was on her. I rang the doorbell, my heart thudding in my chest. The door opened to reveal Emily, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes rimmed with red. For a brief moment I almost felt pity for her, almost. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I held out the folder, my expression unreadable. "These are for you." She glanced at it, and the blood drained from her face. "Is this divorce papers?" I confirmed, my tone devoid of emotion. "Jacob will be in touch to finalize everything." Her trembling hand reached for the folder, but she didn't take it. "Ethan, please, can we just talk about this? Just once? I know I messed up, but I don't want to lose you." I shook my head, the anger I'd kept bottled up threatening to spill over. "Talk? Now you want to talk? Where was this when you were sneaking off to hotels with Ryan? Where was this when you were lying to my face for 6 months?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she stepped closer, her voice desperate. "I was stupid, Ethan. I was selfish and I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. He didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Didn't mean anything? You meant enough to him to walk into a hotel room. Enough to lie to your husband for months. Don't insult me by pretending it was nothing." She crumpled then, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed into her hands. "I didn't want this," she choked out. "I didn't want to ruin us." "Well, you did," I said, my voice like steel. "And now you get to live with it." I placed the folder on the small table by the door and turned to leave. As I reached the driveway, her voice called out behind me, broken and pleading. "Ethan, I love you." I stopped but didn't turn around. "If you loved me, Emily," I said quietly, "you wouldn't have done this." With that, I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing in the doorway, clutching the folder that would end everything we'd once shared. Back at home, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dim light of the living room. My phone buzzed, and I instinctively reached for it, expecting another desperate message from Emily. But it wasn't her. It was Mark. "Mark, thought you'd want to know. Ryan's been out of town all week. Looks like the affair's over. Me, doesn't matter. So is the marriage." I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind heavy with the finality of it all. The chapter was closed, the betrayal laid bare, and the future, whatever it held, was finally mine to shape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Freedom. The weekend passed in a strange, quiet haze. For the first time in years, the house was entirely mine. No sound of Emily's laughter from the kitchen. No echo of her footsteps moving up the stairs. It was just me, the walls, and the creeping silence. At first, I found myself pacing from room to room, unsure of what to do. The ghost of our life together lingered in every corner. The framed photos on the shelves, the throw pillows she'd picked out, even the faint trace of her perfume that clung to the bedroom. I hated it all, yet I couldn't bring myself to change it. Not yet. On Monday morning, Jacob called to confirm that Emily had signed the papers. "It's moving faster than most," he said. "You should be finalized within a month." "Good," I said, though my voice didn't hold the satisfaction I'd expected. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the window, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my chest. The legal part was almost over, but the emotional wreckage would take far longer to clear. Work became my refuge. Each day, I buried myself in projects, pouring every ounce of focus into blueprints and designs. My colleagues noticed the change. Some commented on my newfound intensity, others simply gave me space. I welcomed the distraction, the sense of control that came with shaping something tangible. But even work couldn't shield me completely. The questions crept in during the quiet moments. Did I do enough? Could I have saved us if I'd tried harder? Why wasn't I enough for her? Those questions haunted me most at night, in the stillness of the empty bedroom. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same scenes over and over. Her laughter with Ryan, the hotel, her pleading eyes as she begged me not to leave. They were scars that hadn't yet faded, and I wasn't sure they ever would. By the end of the week, I decided it was time to start reclaiming my life. I began packing up the remnants of Emily in boxes. Her clothes, her books, even the framed wedding photo I'd once cherished. I didn't throw anything away, though the temptation was strong. Instead, I stacked the boxes neatly in the garage, as if storing her memory in a place I didn't have to see every day. It felt like progress, small as it was. Then, on Friday evening, Emily called. I almost didn't answer. The sight of her name on the screen sent a jolt of anger and sadness through me. But something made me pick up. "Ethan," she said, her voice fragile, like she was afraid I might hang up. I wanted to let you know I signed the papers." "I know," I replied, my tone flat. "Jacob told me." There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. "I still can't believe it's come to this," she whispered. "I never wanted this." "Well, it's what we've got," I said sharply. "And you made sure of that." "I didn't mean to," she began, but I cut her off. "Emily, stop. Just stop. You can't undo it. You can't go back. It's done." Her voice broke as she started crying, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. "Not this time." "I'm sorry," she said between sobs. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I still love you." The words hung in the air like a weight, pressing down on my chest. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. "I loved you, Emily," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But the woman I loved wouldn't have done what you did. Whoever you are now, I don't know her, and I don't want to." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't wait to hear more. I ended the call, setting the phone down on the counter with a sense of finality. It hurt, yes, but it also felt like I'd closed a door that should have been shut a long time ago. That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, staring at the flickering light of the fireplace. The pain was still there, raw and unyielding, but beneath it, I felt the faintest flicker of something new, relief. I wasn't tied to her anymore. I wasn't living in the shadow of her betrayal. I was free to start over, to rebuild my life from the ground up. And for the first time in weeks, that thought didn't terrify me. It gave me hope. The first weekend after Emily signed, the papers felt strangely quiet, but not in the suffocating way it had before. This silence wasn't a reminder of what was lost. It was a clean slate, a pause before the next chapter began. For the first time in weeks, I woke up without the heavy knot of dread sitting in my chest. I spent the morning organizing the house. The kitchen, the living room, even the bedroom. I rearranged it all as if reshaping my surroundings could help reshape my mind. The boxes of Emily's things stayed in the garage, tucked away where they couldn't haunt me. It wasn't easy, but each small change felt like a step forward. A reclaimed space, a fresh start. By Monday, the whispers of relief had grown into something stronger. Determination. Work became more than a distraction, it became a purpose. I threw myself into every project, staying late at the office, sketching out designs long after my colleagues had gone home. And the results showed. By the end of the month, I landed a major contract for a new urban development project. My boss was thrilled, but the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. It was proof that I could build something meaningful, something lasting, even in the face of loss. One evening, as I walked home from work, I passed a cafe I'd never noticed before. Its warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, inviting in a way that caught me off guard. On a whim, I stepped inside. The place was cozy, with mismatched chairs and bookshelves lining the walls. I ordered a coffee and found a seat by the window, letting the hum of conversation wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Emily or Ryan or the life I'd left behind. I was just there, present, alive. As I sipped my coffee, I caught the eye of someone sitting a few tables away. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, with dark curls and a shy smile. She glanced up from her book and offered a small nod. It was nothing, a fleeting moment, but it felt like the beginning of something. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, the pieces of my life started to fall into place. The divorce was finalized without drama. Emily and I exchanged a few emails to handle logistics, splitting accounts, canceling subscriptions, but they were brief, businesslike. There were no pleas for reconciliation, no long-winded apologies. Just closure. I heard through mutual friends that Emily moved to a new city, taking a fresh start of her own. Ryan wasn't part of the picture anymore, at least not as far as anyone knew. It didn't matter. Her life was no longer tied to mine. One afternoon, as I packed away the last of our wedding photos, I realized something. The anger was gone. It hadn't disappeared overnight, but it had faded, eroded by time and the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding myself. What remained was a quiet acceptance, a recognition of the lessons learned and the strength gained. Emily's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd neglected, to find resilience I didn't know I had. Months later, I found myself back at the cafe, the same table by the window. This time, the woman with the dark curls was sitting across from me, laughing at something I'd said. Her name was Rachel, and she was a teacher. A kind, thoughtful soul who had her own stories of heartbreak and resilience. It wasn't a fairy tale, and I didn't expect it to be. But as we sat there, the sun setting behind us, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for new beginnings. Hope for love that didn't come with lies or betrayal. Hope for a life that, while imperfect, was entirely my own. And for the first time in months, I let myself smile. Not the hollow, practiced smile I'd worn to survive, but a real one. A smile that felt like the first rays of sunlight after a long, brutal storm. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living.